Good evening. You're watching the main news on HKIBC. I'm Sarah Wong. Our top stories tonight. Hong Kong's daily caseload continues to drop, but authorities warn the fifth wave is far from over. Chinese movers and shakers gather for the National People's Congress at Beijing assures autonomy for the SAR will continue. And Russia agrees to temporary ceasefire in 2 Ukrainian cities, but continues the barrage elsewhere. Hong Kong added 30,000 COVID cases to its tally today, a significant drop from yesterday's number. But health officials have warned it's not time to breathe a sigh of relief yet. Meanwhile, a triple-jabbed patient is among the latest deaths announced this afternoon. Macy Mott reports.
Hong Kong reported 37,529 new COVID cases today. All but 6 were locally transmitted. It's the second day in a row daily numbers have dropped and significantly lower than yesterday's over 50,000. But the Center for Health Protection says it's no time to relax since the caseload is still considered high. The city also recorded an additional 150 deaths. They include a 32-year-old woman who had been double vaccinated with Sinovac and gotten a third BioNTech jab. She tested positive on Monday with a fever and arrived to Princess Margaret Hospital 2 days later with shortness of breath and a swollen neck. Blood tests indicate she could have an acute case of cancer, which she was unaware of. A backlog of 70 COVID deaths were also reported.
According to the latest statistics, among the 1,561 deaths reported as of yesterday, at least 909 deaths were involved residents of residential institutions, accounting for about 58.2% of the total number of deaths. For the vaccination in elderly homes, the government had adhered great importance to enhance and also to facilitate the residents and as well as staff in residential care homes to receive vaccinations.
Over the past 2 weeks, authorities have added 5 more outreach teams on top of the existing 5 to visit care homes to get the elderly vaccinated as quickly as possible. Maisie Mock, HKIBC.
Transport Secretary Frank Chan says over 100 bus routes have been suspended because the city's daily passenger rate has halved amid the outbreak. Meanwhile, government advisor David Hui believes around 15% of Hong Kong's population has been infected by COVID. Here's Macy Mock again.
5 franchise bus companies suspended 104 bus routes starting yesterday. They will not return until at least March the 16th.
個出行嗰個人次呢已經下降呢係超過5成幾，咁我哋見到有時呢佢係跌咗6成嘅。
Taking to the airwaves this morning, Secretary for Transport and Housing Frank Chan said the arrangement comes as daily passenger trips dropped by up to 60% amid the latest explosive fifth wave. He explained there is a manpower shortage within the public transport sector as staff are getting infected and being put into quarantine. But he assured overall public transport operations are normal and suggested people can switch to minibuses or the MTR instead. Asked whether there is a risk of large-scale public transport outages if infection numbers continue to climb and more transport staffers are affected, Chan only said the current situation remains under control.
間數可能都15% 嘅人而家都可能受感染。
Meanwhile, on another radio program, government medical advisor David Hui said he believes around 15% of the city's 7.5 million people have already been infected by COVID. This estimate is based on observing buildings that have been put into lockdown lately, where around 10 to 20% of residents are returning positive results. He added that the current wave is expected to peak in the next 2 weeks. He also had some advice for the government, which is working out details for a mass testing program slated for later this month. The respiratory disease expert said the aggressive campaign should not take place while the outbreak is at its most severe. It should instead be moved to when infection numbers are starting to go down. Maisie Mock, HKIBC.
Police arrested a 62-year-old man for violating the multi-household gathering restriction at an industrial building in Kuntong yesterday. The man was released on bail today. Officers found him and 3 other men gathered inside a unit during a nighttime sweep. The others were slapped with fines and faced prosecution. The government had earlier tightened social distancing rules in private premises to prohibit more than 2 families from gathering. China's 13th National People's Congress kicked off today with over 160 absentees. Making stability a priority, the ruling party announced a GDP growth target, which was slightly lower than last year's. The central government also pledged to stick to the Hong Kong people ruling Hong Kong principle. Isaac Lee reports.
President Xi Jinping and other central government leaders made their way into the Great Hall of the People in Beijing this morning. State Council Premier Li Keqiang summarized the nation's financial performance and government's work over the past year. Gross domestic product grew by 8.1%, but the Communist Party will only aim for an economic growth of 5.5% in the coming year. Li said the new targets had taken into account risk avoidance and the need for steady development. He emphasized that urgent livelihood needs should be prioritized when deciding government expenditure, adding that those who misuse public funds will be severely punished. Meanwhile, the national defense budget has been raised by 7.1% to over 1.4 trillion yuan. The party also spent 1 paragraph in the 30-page government work report to reiterate their stance on Hong Kong and Macau affairs. Li said China will continue to uphold the principles of Hong Kong people ruling Hong Kong and allowing a high degree of autonomy. He added that the central government will support the 2 special administrative regions in developing economy, improving people's livelihood, and maintaining prosperity. On Taiwan, Beijing said it will stick to the One China policy and 1992 consensus. Attempts to separate Taiwan from China will be strictly prohibited. Meanwhile, Vice Chairperson of the NPC Standing Committee Wong said the number of Hong Kong representatives in the Congress will remain at 36. They will be elected by Chinese citizen members of the SAR's election committee. Wong added that the principle of patriots ruling Hong Kong will be strictly implemented. Among the more than 2,900 members of the Congress, 161 were absent, including 19 representatives from Hong Kong. Most of them were forced to miss the event for being close contacts of COVID patients. Adding to those who missed the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, which began yesterday, a total of 330 members were absent, the most in history. Isaac Lee, HKIBC.
Overseas, Russia has declared a temporary ceasefire in 2 Ukrainian cities to allow citizens to leave following peace talks with Kyiv. But fighting and bombardment continued elsewhere as Russian forces bore down on the capital. A bleak sky in the Ukrainian capital Kyiv ushered in the 10th day of the Russian incursion. The scale of destruction was devastating. Nearby, the village of Beijing lied in ruins. Local residents accused Russian forces of intentionally shelling residential buildings, which the Kremlin has denied. Moscow is barely hiding that it wants to force Ukraine into submission as troops continue to encroach on Kyiv. With advances in the north facing stiff resistance, Russian forces have accelerated their push to cut Ukraine off from the Black Sea. Residents in Mykolaiv in the southwest braced for an imminent attack, while nearby Odessa geared up for troops poised to arrive from the waters. Intensified fighting has forced over 1.2 million people to leave Ukraine, with over half of them pouring into neighboring Poland. Following peace talks with Ukraine, the Russian Defense Ministry announced a temporary ceasefire in two cities, Volnovakha and Mariupol, the key trade port that Russia has struggled to seize. Other residents chose to stay to defend their homeland. In the western city of Lviv, hundreds of civilians were given first aid training. It is a very dangerous moment for our country, this 25-year-old man said. That's why we're here, to learn how to help each other. The Ukrainian president has denounced NATO for ruling out a no-fly zone over his country. This as Kyiv and Moscow blamed each other for putting Europe's largest nuclear power plant in jeopardy. The Ukrainian ambassador struck a grim tone at the United Nations Security Council after Russian forces attacked and seized the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Sergei Kislizia said the safety of the whole world was at stake.
It is not only Ukraine under Russian attack. It is Europe. It is the entire world. It is humanity.
Russia in turn accused Ukrainian forces of aggression.
There was even military operation against the nuclear electric plant by the Ukrainians battalions. So this is a real threat.
As foreign ministers from Western countries huddled to discuss the war raging at Europe's doorstep, President Volodymyr Zelensky again pressed NATO to impose a no-fly zone over Ukraine. But his plea was rejected by the US-led Western Defense Alliance in a bid to avoid a larger conflict.
The only way to actually implement something like a no-fly zone is to send NATO planes into Ukrainian airspace and to shoot down Russian planes, and that could lead to a full-fledged war in Europe.
In a rare move, Singapore joined the array of Western capitals in sanctioning Russia, the only ASEAN country to do so. Mounting international pressure forced Moscow to tighten its grip at home. State communications regulator Roskomnadzor blocked access to Facebook and Twitter and kicked major foreign media outlets off the airwaves. Anyone deemed to be spreading fake news about Russia's armed forces could face up to 15 years in prison. On to the weather now. Tomorrow will be mainly cloudy, starting with a bit of rain and fog in the morning. Temperatures range between 18 and 22 degrees. Expect a few rain patches on Monday morning, while Tuesday will be cool and dry. Now let's take a look at the weather around the world. That's our main news for this Saturday night. We'll be back at 10 tonight with more updates. I'm Sarah Wong. Please stay safe and take care.